Oh, really? Yeah, Raiders of the Lost Ark. Here's my thesis. Indiana Jones has good hero motivation, but doesn't defeat the villain. Also, the villains suck and the entire story needs to be rewritten with a new villain. I'm not going to be able to fix this one in this short video because I'm not rewriting the whole dang movie, but I can explain how all of these problems make Raiders of the Lost Ark not a story. So let's begin. Nazis are a cop-out villain here. This isn't Band of Brothers. Heck, even in Band of Brothers, there weren't this many Nazis. The reason I bring up Band of Brothers is because it's a story about what Easy Company went through while deployed at the end of World War II. We're not in suspense about whether or not the Allied powers will win the war against the Axis powers. We already know who wins World War II. What we care about are the characters. In Indiana Jones, though, and in a lot of other media, Nazis are just thrown in as stock villains for heroes with plot armor, and even worse when it's done in World War II. The problem is, if it's set in World War II, we already know who wins. If your movie isn't character-driven, we don't need to watch it to find out if the villain loses. This is bad writing. If the if the audience already knows that the villain in your story is going to fail, then there's absolutely no suspense whatsoever because everything will be fine even if your hero or heroes die. Heck, the audience might even be expecting them to die as part of how history played out to help defeat the Nazis, but that's completely off the table because the audience can see your hero as plot armor. In these stories, you can't have a classic hero with plot armor like Indiana Jones because it completely removes any and all tension from your story. This is compared to a story like Band of Brothers or Inglourious Bastards, which, those aren't stories, but as examples, where regardless of what side you're on, we already know what let me re-say that. Where regardless of what side you're on, we know any character can die and any character can live. It's not about the war. It's about the people fighting, why they fight, and if they die, how they die, and if they live, how they lived. In Raiders, though, the war isn't the setting, but the Nazis are the villains. If the war isn't the setting, then we need different villains. And you don't even need the grand unified theory of storytelling to know any of this so far. The only saving grace of this film is that at the time it came out, Nazis were not so overdone as a stock villain trope yet, but the above narrative problems still exist, so it's still bad writing. But now let's talk more about Indy. I guess we're jumping to the end of the film here. We'll swing back around. So Indy doesn't defeat the villains. This is a problem. They somehow went through the trouble of writing an entire script and shooting an entire film, and the cut they released to theaters just has their big hero tied up while a Deus Ex Machina melts the villains' faces? What a slap in the unmelted face of everyone who bought a ticket. I guess Steven and George always had it out for poor Indy. So we have our hero, we have our villains. The exposition is fantastic, and our hero is motivated by almost everything a hero could be, except his own fortune. Although, there is a romantic subplot, so we count that. This is totally fine, though, and I think it works very well for his character. I do think he should have pursued his romantic subplot, though, because here it matters. He may not want to seek literal fortune, but kind of especially for his character, it absolutely makes sense for him to want to find love. In this regard, I think Rick from The Mummy does a much better job marrying Evie, who then joins him on his adventures. Indy, on the other hand, goes through 3 movies where his romantic interests get progressively worse after Marion, who was obviously the one for him. He goes from Marion to a prima donna to a female Nazi who also boned his dad. I'd really like to see an Indiana Jones movie where it's Raiders of the Lost Ark, but right after he falls asleep on the plane at the beginning of the movie, he wakes up in another version of his life, a la Nick Cage's The Family Man, where he gets to see what his life would be like if he'd stuck with Marion. During the film, they go on an adventure as a duo, but cooperating as a genuine team, except this is all new to him. At the end of the movie, he wakes up and realizes he's landing in Nepal on his way to see his timeline's Marion, where the events of Raiders will play out. But this time, there's just something different. And then cut to black, roll credits. But let's get back on track here. So, I like the first act. Act 1 of Raiders is good, but again, it needs a different villain. Being a classic hero, Indy really needs a villain who can establish a continued threat. Just like the classic serials that inspired him, Indy needs villains that stick around, like secret mystic cabals scouring the globe for evil magic artifacts, an international organization of thief mercenaries who steal for hire, and especially a counter to his own virtues, the anti-archaeologist. Basically Belloq, but written correctly. Belloq falls completely flat as a villain because he's overshadowed by his surrounding entourage of clearly more evil Nazis. Except again, this is also undermined because since this is happening in World War II, the Nazis as big bads also don't pose any threat to either the classic hero with plot armor or the world at large, because we know the Nazis lose the war. So both our villain and our big bad are about as threatening as a wet fart. So nobody cares about Belloq, no one is scared of Belloq, and Belloq is too stupid to survive the first movie, so we never have to worry about him sticking around as Indy's rival. Indy needs a rival. One who's as clever as him, but without any moral fiber. Basically Gordon Gekko. He has no regard for history and doesn't see the value in museums. He deals more with private collectors. A positive thing about this movie is that I think they do a good job introducing Marion, or I guess I should say another positive thing. But then she doesn't have any place in the story after that, after she's introduced. She's connected to the hero, but nothing she does after her introduction moves the plot forward, and after her introduction, they don't give her any reason to remain in the film. After that point, the film could happen basically the same, and there would be no difference. To fix this, she should have known something her father told her about how to use the medallion before he died that Indy didn't know, and Indy needs to rescue her in Act 2 so she can help him find the Ark. She also could then help Indy in Act 3 somehow, but without figuring out how I'd write Gordon Gekko as the villain in Raiders of the Lost Ark, I don't know how I'd end up doing that. So Indy doesn't defeat the villain, and he also doesn't really fulfill any of his goals. He doesn't get the girl, I mean, kind of, but he doesn't end up with her. He doesn't recover the Ark, and when he had the chance to kill Hitler, he chickened out. Yeah. So that's what we're left with. This terrible, no good, very bad ending that's not even like, they didn't even bother with, alternate history or something. But in order to fix Raiders of the Lost Ark, we'd have to rewrite the whole story. Marion would still be there, and you'd keep the Ark if you wanted to, but now there'd be other things at play that inform how the story would end, and I don't want to bother writing it, so I'm not going to, and that's that. That's not why I'm here. I'm here to show how the stories you think are stories are actually not, and then fix them. But if the story can't be fixed, then I'm going to leave it at that and say I draw the line at stories so bad they need to be rewritten entirely. Here's a news flash to writers. You're a writer. You can make literally anything happen in a story. Stop making boring things happen. If you're going through the trouble of creating a hero like Indiana Jones in an Art Deco serial adventure setting, then do him the respect of making adequate villains that can expand the world and don't undermine the suspense of your entire film as soon as they're introduced. Also, unless you're going to do something serious with it, don't bring in stock religious artifacts as your doomsday devices, only to use them as deus ex machinas, and then lock them up in a warehouse never to be seen again. Make up your own. Again, you're a writer. You can make any magic artifact you need. You can make any religion you need. And I guess while Temple of Doom does do a better job of this, it's not great, and it severely lacks in impact because the threat is completely localized to a village in India. Indy says the chakra stones were given to humanity by the gods to fight evil, but only explains later that if they're brought together, the diamonds inside will glow, and his explanation ends there. Mola Ram says if they get all 5 stones together, the Thuggee cult will be all-powerful. Kali Ma will rule the world, and even says he'll make Indy a true believer, but he never does. He makes him drink a potion that seems to make Indy hallucinate, but he recovers quickly and faints being hypnotized so he can rescue his friends and escape. For a series that started with ghosts flying out of a box and melting a bunch of Nazis, this supernatural threat is severely lacking. I don't think those stones do anything, but the diamonds inside might be valuable. The point is, as a writer, you can make anything happen in your story. Do not write a villain gathering magic stones to rule the world, but never make good on that threat. Nothing that happens to Indy or his friends poses any threat to them in Temple of Doom, except maybe the food. Anyway, The Autopsy. Raiders of the Lost Ark is a big disappointment. Indy is a well-written hero with good motivations, but he neither achieves any of his goals, nor even gets closer to achieving them. This was supposed to be a classic adventure serial with a classic hero, a classic heroine, and a classic villain. But what we got was a Deus Ex Machina melting the faces of all the villains the hero doesn't get to defeat, Marion being written as deadweight, the hero dropping their own romantic subplot, and the story's villain needs to be rewritten, which is basically saying you need to rewrite the entire thing. So far, Mary Shelley is in the lead. And that's it. Not sure what media I'll break down next, but I've got some lists of the greatest movies of all time, and I see some choice picks. Let me find a real darling to destroy. We'll see.